Hello, and thanks for joining us for Prepped and Polished Education and Inspiration. I'm your host, Alexis Avila, educator, online entrepreneur, and founder of tutoring and test prep firm Prepped and Polished, broadcasting today from South Natick, Massachusetts. Prepped and Polished Education Inspiration is your destination for groundbreaking insight from today's most influential educators, leaders, and minds on the planet. Our show is brought to you today by Plan for College Videos. Nationally known college planning expert Paul Hemphill has a wonderful series, about 100 videos of college planning videos, and his videos ask all the questions with answers that parents don't know to ask, and parents don't know what they don't know, so the frustration ends with his videos. Learn more about those, planning-for-college.com/videos. And you can always get to know the Prepped and Polished community. You can find us on the Twitters, Facebooks, etc., etc. Joining our show today is Sarah Ward, who's co-director of Cognitive Connections, an executive function practice. It's based out of Concord, Massachusetts. Sarah has 15 years of experience in diagnostic evaluations, treatment and case management of children, adolescents, and adults with a wide range of developmental and acquired brain-based learning difficulties and behavioral problems. And Sarah's particular interest is the assessment and treatment of executive function deficits. Sarah is the past president of the Massachusetts Brain Injury Association, and she regularly presents locally, nationally, internationally on the topics of executive functions. And Sarah is going to be talking to us about executive function disorder and teaching us strategies for improving executive function skills. To our listeners, you can submit a question at any time, and it's radio@preppedandpolished.com. We always appreciate hearing from you. Sarah Ward, thank you so much for joining us on Prepped and Polished Education Inspiration. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So I took one of your workshops at the Landmark School in Beverly, Massachusetts, Advanced Strategies for Improving Executive Function Skills. And I was really impressed by your teaching style. You made what is a complicated subject to me a lot easier to understand. So I thank you for that.
Thanks. Exciting topic. I'm quite passionate about it.
So tell us a little bit about your background first and where you come from.
Sure. Surprises a lot of people to know that I'm a speech and language pathologist. So I don't do any speech-based disorders, but I really focus on the language and the linguistic aspects between sort of executive function and how we use our language to sort of think about the world and interact with the world and plan our time and be organized. And I actually grew up in Colorado and ended up in Southern California for college, and then I came out here for my master's degree at the Institute of Health Professions, where I received my degree in speech and language pathology, and I worked at Mass General Hospital for many years on the inpatient and outpatient traumatic brain injury unit, and often individuals who have sustained a traumatic brain injury struggle with executive function skills. So that was sort of my early introduction to exactly what are the challenges that people experience when they have lost executive function skills, which really led me down the path of, well, if you lost them, how do we actually really acquire and learn this skill of task execution in the first place?
Gotcha. So a lot of our listeners are teens. You work with a lot of teenagers, and I'm sure they'd like to know what was Sarah like as a teen growing up in Southern California, in Colorado?
In Colorado. Well, it might surprise people to know that I balanced my time, but most of my time was spent skiing. I am a diehard skier. I absolutely love it. I started skiing when I was about 3 or 4 years old, and my favorite thing is the longest, deepest, steepest mogul runs you can find in Colorado. And so I was an avid student, and I did study, but really I spent as much time as I possibly could on the slopes. And when it came to finally making a choice to go to college, I thought I might ski. And my mom and dad sort of influenced me that college might be the better path. So I did. I took off to college, and I decided that if I was going to do it, I better go somewhere completely different than Colorado. So I went coastal and went to California. But
awesome.
I was an avid student and loved everything from historical fiction to creative writing. And I really enjoyed the sciences, particularly kind of the earth biology sciences. Not such a huge fan of chemistry and physics.
Gotcha. And who were some of your major influences growing up?
Oh, goodness. Probably some of the professional skiers that I used to sort of run in circles with. I used to do quite a few professional kind of mogul ski competitions, freestyle competitions. And so I actually think at the time those people were really influential to me because they were sort of balancing this idea between what makes you happy and really sort of pursuing things of interest, and at the same time really trying to stay true to an academic course. And I think they were pretty influential to keep me sort of balancing both of those things.
Wow, that's awesome. So you already kind of told us a little bit about your work in your master's program, and it kind of told us a little bit about what may have propelled you to start your own practice at Cognitive Connections. But when did you start Cognitive Connections, and what types of services do you provide there?
So Cognitive Connections started about 15 years ago with my co-director, Kristen Jacobson. She, too, is a speech and language pathologist, and we had both gone to the same graduate program, although graduated in different years, and we had also worked together at Mass General Hospital. And what we were really finding was that there was a need to provide sort of private services and therapies to families. And we really treated two different realms. So we worked with families who had kids ranging in ages from 6 all the way through college. And then we also worked with a number of adults who, for the most part, people would have said they had what would be called, to the naked eye, kind of a mild traumatic brain injury, but people sometimes were really struggling. So these were individuals who maybe had taken a fall from a bike or sports concussion kinds of injuries and were functioning, for all intents and purposes, at a pretty high level, but were still struggling with managing their time, being able to remember information, being able to sort of follow through on tasks. And there were lots of kids that were very bright, high intelligence, really good students, but struggling with the output demands. So they could go to class, they were really participating, they had a strong handle on the information, oftentimes were really participating in class and liked the material, but when it finally came to the demand of organizing their time and all the backpack and the locker and really being able to say what we close that homework circle of, recording the homework assignment, doing the homework, putting the homework back in the backpack, getting it back to school, remembering to turn it in. Sometimes that output demand was pretty intense for students, and so we really started to meet the needs of those students.
Wow, that's amazing. And so Sarah, I always struggle with this, but do we say executive function disorder, or is it executive functioning disorder, or both?
The reality is that there is no common terminology.
Okay.
When, for example, someone goes and they've had an evaluation and someone is looking at their cognitive linguistic skills, typically that's your neuropsychologist, they will often use the DSM manual, which is that psychology manual, to sort of come up with a diagnosis, and people often have to meet criteria. So, for example, if you had attention deficit, they would look to see if you met the 5 criteria for that disorder. There is not currently a disorder known as executive function disorder or executive dysfunction, so it's used pretty interchangeably. In general, what we are seeing, though, is that more and more students and adults are being evaluated, and they are not meeting the criteria for the other cognitive linguistic disorders. So they don't meet the criteria for attention deficit. They may not meet the criteria for maybe a spectrum disorder such as Asperger's or high-functioning autism. And they're just struggling again with this high level output and ability to sort of regulate themselves within a moment in time. So they may be distracted, or they may not be able to complete things within the amount of time that's been given to them. They may sort of be in the wrong space at the wrong time. They may not always read the room. And so more and more, they're just being, diagnosed as having executive function challenges. I think the most appropriate terminology is sort of executive dysfunction, because I think that we haven't qualified it as a disorder yet.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Do you think the DSM will adopt the term in the future?
I do, absolutely. There's a lot of debate in the field right now. So oftentimes people, Russell Barkley, for example, is one of the top researchers in the field of executive function and attention deficit, and he and some of the other top researchers believe that attention deficit disorder should actually be called EFDD, which is executive function developmental delay, because typically individuals with weak attention, in fact, it's not that they have a lack of attention, it's that they're paying attention to everything. And when you're paying attention to everything, sometimes it makes it hard to prioritize your attention and to prioritize where that focus goes to managing and to multitasking. And often individuals with attention-based disorders really show a developmental lag in their executive skills. And the development of the executive skills has a trajectory over time, and there are certain milestones that we expect students to meet. And if you're on a kind of quote-unquote normal course, they're not fully developed until 23 to 26 years of age. So we do see a lot of maturity in students who are 18, students who are 20, 23. It's not unusual for me to have students who have come back and, boy, by the time they're a junior, senior in college, they're saying, okay, I'm getting this. I'm really feeling the flow of it. Similarly, if a student is really demonstrating a developmental delay, you may have an 18, 17-year-old student who's a sophomore, junior, senior in high school who is struggling with the demands of the academics simply because their level of kind of this organization executive functioning ability is that more of a 14 or 15-year-old. And so as clinicians and as parents and providers, I think it's critical that we really look at the developmental level of a student's executive skills and meet the student at their developmental level and build their skills from there, because that's what's going to support them. In other words, we don't want to keep looking at a junior in high school and say, well, just try harder, just keep doing it, because really they may not be at that level cognitively. So we have to sort of meet them at that level.
Gotcha. And has learning the skills to overcome EF disorder, have you seen this displace the students' needs for sometimes for meds such as ADHD medications and stuff like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that it's certainly very individual per family. It's very individual per student.
Absolutely.
But within the scope of that, I find that there are students who absolutely benefit from medication, and I really see it as sort of a kind of like a stool. If it's a three-legged stool, the idea is that you're supporting the student with strategies and tools to develop these skills. The second leg of the stool is that you're providing an environment that supports the student in being able to use their executive function skills successfully. And then the third leg of the stool can be medication, where oftentimes if students have their attention and their focus and their sort of body regulation in check, they may be more available to learn some of the tools and strategies, internalize them, and have them become more automatic. And then at times you can even lift that medication because you've developed the underlying skills necessary. And so I think sometimes if you pull out any one of those legs, just like a stool, sometimes things collapse a little bit. But I certainly have students who have gone on medication and they say, oh my gosh, I just, why didn't I try this before? It really makes a tremendous difference in my ability to feel in check, in control, and being able to focus and take in information and organize it and then do output, be able to do written expression or to be able to manage the homework load. But it is very individualized.
When I started tutoring back in '99, I never knew of these strategies, the executive function strategies that you and other coaches teach. Were they around back 10, 15, 20 years ago, and we just didn't know about it, or are these new strategies that we've learned?
I just think that's an outstanding question. Really, about 10, 15 years ago, there was this flux in literature where we were simply defining what is this executive function skill? What's it characterized by? What are the features of it? What part of the brain does this skill? What happens when you aren't doing this skill? And it was really far more at the level of investigation. Even though we've been using the term executive function forever, there was just a huge sort of rise in research around that time. And I really would say it hasn't been until maybe the last 5 to 7 years that you have seen suddenly a huge shift in going from simply defining it to then saying, wow, how do we actually treat it and really get people to incorporate interventions that change the way that they neurologically do this skill, not just compensation. I mean, I think that for a long time there were some strategies around making a to-do list, kind of giving yourself a reminder and some of these compensations, but the compensations weren't really changing and developing and building executive function. And certainly in the past 2 years, it's just exploded in terms of people are talking about it. They're really coming up with new, dynamic, interesting interventions to treat it. Although I will say it's also very regional. Having lectured across the United States, I see that knowledge and awareness of executive function is very, very strong in the Northeast, very, very strong in Southern and Northern California, in Chicago. But you go to certain states and they kind of say executive what, and it's not really a familiar term at all. So that just goes to show you that the field in and of itself is still really quite in its infancy.
Wow. And, to get all the strategies for overcoming EF deficits, you have to see Sarah speak. But Sarah, what are some of your favorite strategies to employ when working with students with EF deficits?
So I guess if I had to choose, I'd probably do the top 3. To me, I think the first thing that really shakes people's understanding of what executive function is that it really is this ability to pre-imagine the future and to sort of think about what you're going to do before you go do it. And that often means that you might even imagine what you're going to do in a space before you enter that space. And when I'm working with a lot of students, it's helpful to give them the analogy of a dress rehearsal. So if the student is doing a play, the night or two before the play, they do a dress rehearsal where they put on all the clothes and the costumes. They have all of their props. They walk through and they sort of do this full run through to kind of get a feel for it. What are the glitches? How's it going to go? And another example of that is for kids who play sports, for example, football. Sometimes a football team will do a walkthrough without any pads. So, they'll go out, the football team, they'll walk through the plays, but they don't actually have their padding on and they're not really playing the real game. That's really what executive function is all about. It's about doing this kind of mental dress rehearsal in your head and kind of playing through your plan before you actually go and do that plan. So the 2 examples might be that I really coach students. All right, well, if you're downstairs and you're eating breakfast and you're thinking about getting ready for the day, that you don't just go up into your bedroom and say, okay, I'm going to get ready, because now when you're in your bedroom, you're open to distraction. You might see, I don't know, a book you've been interested in reading, your phone can be there, and you start picking it up and looking at Instagram. But if you're downstairs eating and say, okay, let me imagine my plan and let me put that into a time frame. okay, I've got about 7 minutes to get ready. So I see and I imagine myself walking upstairs. I'm going to quickly brush my teeth. I'm going to go in my bedroom. And you really want to see your bedroom and imagine, all right, I see myself in my bedroom. And now how am I going to move in my bedroom? I'm going to go to my desk and get that binder and put it in my backpack. I'm going to go over to the dresser and grab a sweatshirt. And then I'm going to grab my shoes by the closet and come back downstairs. I find that students who don't sort of pre-imagine that plan, it's almost like they become a beat or two behind. So they go upstairs and they get the backpack and they come downstairs and they go, oh, right, I need a sweatshirt. And they go back upstairs to get the sweatshirt. And they come back down and they go, oh, I need my shoes. And they go back up and get their shoes, but they might notice something and get distracted. And now they're not been able to complete what they need to in the amount of time that they have. So really teaching students to do this sort of mental dress rehearsal. Okay, you're going to be doing homework. Don't just say, oh, I need to do my chemistry or I need to do my math, but really pre-imagine, okay, well, what does that really look like if I'm spending the next half hour doing that? And what materials do I see that I need and how would I manage in tackling that and then going to do it? Which really leads me to probably my second favorite strategy. Certainly, students and most people these days live in a digital world. We look at the microwave if we're running late, it's digital. Most individuals, if you say what time is it, they whip out their cell phone to tell you. The number of people that wear an analog watch is shockingly low. And yet, the ability to use an analog time is what really allows us to see time as a volume. But so certainly one strategy we use is we like to use glass clock faces, and we actually use a dry erase marker and shade the amount of time. Okay, I have 20 minutes. Let me shade what that 20 minutes looks like. But also for students who may not want to kind of whip out a clock and a marker, the importance is creating mental time markers. So it's being able to look at the clock and say, it's 12 o'clock now. That's where 12:20 is. I see that 12:10 is my first time marker. By 12:10, I want to have half the chapter in my book read. And always being able to imagine that, so that if you're at your house and you're saying, well, I need to leave the house at 3:20, my first time marker is that by 3:05, I want to be upstairs and gathering all of my things for my whatever soccer practice. And by 3:15, I've really got to be back downstairs in the kitchen and grab my water bottle, and then that'll get me out the door on time by 3:20. You have to really see that future marker in time. And a lot of our students don't see time and they don't create a time marker. So there's just this kind of, they're plodding along on kind of their own time schedule, and then all of a sudden they're running late. And I think that's really hard for students. So I think those strategies of pre-imagining and setting a time marker are really crucial. And then I think that the third strategy, which is sort of a quick one, and I like it a lot. It relates, again, to sort of mental dress rehearsal, is Ned Hallowell, who's certainly one of the fathers of attention deficit disorder and has written so many books. He has a favorite acronym, and he calls it OHIO, which is Only Handle It Once. And I really love that with students as it relates to executive function as just a quick strategy, because what I find is students are sort of doing things like their homework, or maybe they're in their bedroom and they're getting undressed, or they've gotten out of the shower and they have their towel, or they've finished making a sandwich. And there's this desire to just kind of leave it as it is and kind of move along, right? And the problem with that is that executive function also really requires that you constantly know what something will look like when it's done and that you close out a task, right? You have to really sort of close it out for the next time and know what that looks like. And so I find with students, if I can say to them, only handle it once, right? So that if you finish that homework, handle it once and put it away in the right spot. Because if you don't do that, then you've got to handle it twice, and it's twice the work. So if you have been making the sandwich in the kitchen and you think, okay, well, I'm just going to go deal with this later, and you throw the dishes in the sink, well, it isn't completely done. Only handle it once. Get them in the dishwasher right away. Otherwise, you're going to have to come back and do twice the work, and you're going to have to find time to do that. And I think for those students who are functioning at that higher level is getting it to the point of automaticity that you can just sort of do things and do it once and be done with it, reduces the workload in the long run.
Absolutely. Love it. Can you share with us like a quick success story where you've seen a student really come to you with some EF deficits, and after some strategy implementation, she was able to make some significant progress?
Absolutely. So I have a student who is a junior in high school, very bright young woman, generally a pretty good student, but the grades were not reflecting her intelligence simply because when you looked at the grades, it was missing homework, or maybe she hadn't studied for a test, or late handing something in, or the quality wasn't quite where she was capable of. And when you really looked at the quality, it wasn't because she was incapable of writing. It was merely that she had kind of blown it off and was, experiencing procrastination and a little anxiety about writing, and all of a sudden ran out of time. So the writing reflected the amount of time she had, not her actual writing ability. And in some ways, I think she had really been feeling very beat down by all of this. And so her motivation had kind of come to a point where it's like, whatever, I don't even care anymore. And she's not an unmotivated student. I mean, she wants to do well. She wants to impress her teachers. She really wants to go on to college, et cetera. But it's just at the point of it's so hard to manage and organize and get all of these things done. And when you looked at her backpack, lots of things were kind of shoved inside, kind of a black hole. And her sense of time was quite poor. So she would sit down to do homework, and homework assignments, which should have taken 15, 20 minutes, was suddenly taking her 2 to 3 hours. And it was not because she was slow at processing and doing it. It was because she was starting and stopping and might get stuck and then put it away and not come back to it. And so I hope that kind of gives you a profile of who this student was. Mm-hmm. So I think a number of things that were highly successful with her was to start with teaching her the concept of having a working binder and a storage binder and dedicating one day a week to what we call a super binder clean out. So in her working binder, she kept the most pertinent material related to the topic per class. So, for example, if they were in English reading about the Scarlet Letter, everything about Scarlet Letter went in her working binder, whether it was homework, whether it was an article about the author, whether it was a cheat sheet to Old English language, etc. Everything was there. And then, as soon as they finished up Hawthorne, she would take those materials and put them together and move it to a storage binder in her house. So she wasn't throwing it away, but she wasn't carrying around this massive load of papers. And then let's say they went on from Scarlet Letter to Pride and Prejudice. So everything, again, related to Pride and Prejudice was in the working binder, and as soon as they stopped reading Pride and Prejudice, organized those materials and moved it from that working binder to the storage binder. And the real beauty of that was that then when it came time for finals, and they gave the study guide, here's what you need to prepare for Scarlet Letter, here's what you need to prepare for Pride and Prejudice, everything was already together and organized in one place in her storage binder. She wasn't carrying around miscellaneous, unnecessary materials, but they were still available to her when she needed them. And that reduced this paper load mess in her backpack. The second thing is that it's not uncommon for adults to be at work and get a piece of paper and put it in their briefcase, right? I think a lot of people struggle to kind of open up a three-ring binder, close a three-ring binder, put the binder away. It's just naturally it feels hard when you have limited time at the end of the class. So we really helped her become consistent with a specific time every night. And she actually had a show that she really liked to watch. So during the commercials of that one show, and it was kind of her motivation to watch that show, she would go through, take out all the loose papers, get them in the right spot, find them, and once a week kept up with it. And guess what? She was suddenly highly organized with all of her materials, and homework assignments were getting handed in, etc. The second key thing that was a real success was we got her to the point that every single time she looked at an assignment, she was outstanding at learning how to accurately estimate and create a time frame to complete something. And we use something called the minute gauge rule. So we would have her look and say, okay, the chapter I have to read is 20 pages. If each page were to take me 1 minute, then guaranteed, for sure, I need 20 minutes to read. Mm-hmm. And if it's a little bit trickier reading, I can double that. It would take me 40 minutes to read. Mm-hmm. But then we also got her to say, do you really want to spend 60 minutes reading that page? Is that appropriate? And all of a sudden you'll see kids go, oh yeah, I don't want to spend 60 minutes. That would be too much time. So she really got good at having an awareness of creating time markers for herself. So if she had a calculus homework assignment, she might look and say, okay, there are 10 practice problems. If each one took me 1 minute, for sure it would take me 10 minutes. But actually, I think these problems are pretty hard, so I'm going to give myself 30 minutes for the 10 problems. So my first time marker, if I'm starting my homework at 4, is at 4:15. I want to have 5 problems done. And by getting kids to check in at a midpoint and to self-monitor and to have that metacognition where they're saying, okay, how's it going? Am I at a good midpoint? And if I'm not, why not? Do I have any time robbers? Am I distracted? Or is the work really hard and I need to reach out and help? It's not a good use of my time to keep plugging along at this problem because I'm probably not going to get it, and I've already demonstrated that I've put forth effort. I need to move on. And so I think really raising her awareness of how she was spending time and completing it. And then the last thing that was really crucial for the student and made a real success story was every homework assignment that she had, we would have her put a Post-it note on it that stated which class and what time she was going to be turning it in. So she might look at it and say, okay, well, this is for English language arts, but I have my ELA class because I have a rotating schedule at 2 o'clock tomorrow, so that'll be due at 2. I look at this math assignment, and because of my rotating schedule, math's my first period, I'll be turning it in at 7:45, and put 7:45 math on top of that paper. And then to stack up her assignments in the time order that they were going to be turned in, so that if at the end of the day she suddenly opened up her folder and it was 3 o'clock and there was still an item in there from 2 o'clock, she would know that she had forgotten to turn something in and would go back and turn them in. So again, making turning in homework associated with the time that you're turning it in is more effective than simply saying, yeah, I've got to turn in math tomorrow. And I think those things collectively, managing her materials, estimating her time, and doing that mental dress rehearsal of pre-imagining when she was going to be turning in materials, really led to a real success story in her raising her grades and having a real strong GPA and all around feeling more successful about school.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm totally using that test prep, the second strategy for test prep, because if we can get students with EF figuring out how many questions they have per minute, or how much time they have per question, rather, so they can kind of keep moving on, I think that could help them with their test anxiety and so forth.
Absolutely. And gives them it gives you a sense of control of your own time and to kind of regulate how you're approaching problems.
Absolutely. So Sarah, tell us about your online store. I know that you just came out with a really cool academic calendar for students who have EF deficits and other cool things.
Yeah, so we do have an online store, and we have several products that are probably our best-selling products. The academic planner, which you mentioned, Kristen and I have been creating daily planning sheets for students, and we finally said, wow, it's so well received. Students are doing so well using it. We should really just put it and bind it together into kind of a formal planning product, which we did about 4 years ago. And so every year we take feedback from clients and families, and we keep really streamlining it and adjusting it. And it's a daily academic planner, which support students in kind of what we say policing their own time. And so we help them to think about time that they want to spend chilling out, to understand where their time is obligated, for example, with practices or driving back and forth between a tutor session or to school, and then really understanding the amount of time that they have available to be productive. It teaches students to imagine and to be advanced aware of the materials that they need for homework assignments, and to estimate the time and to quickly prioritize when items are due. And it allows them to see what their day will look like, to see available time. And so it really is for that student who needs to have a strong handle on managing their day and managing their time. And we find students love it because it actually ends up giving them a method for freeing up time and being able to have that kind of balanced life, which certainly I think is really important. It's important to me in high school. The second top products we have are an analog clock, and our analog clock is popular because it's tickless. So if you have an analog clock in front of you, you can shade on top of it. You can really see the passage of time, but it won't be annoying when you're doing your work and that clock is going tick, tick, tick. The second thing is we have a product called track nets, and the track nets are magnets that we put around the metal frame of the clock, and it allows the student to very clearly see and visualize a time marker. So if I'm doing homework from 3 to 3:30, I can put a magnet at 3 o'clock, I can put a magnet at the 3:30 spot, and then I can put a check-in magnet at the 3:15 spot, so that as I see the hand moving through time, the minute hand moving through time, and I see it approaching my time marker, it reminds me to check in and see, am I at the midpoint? Am I where I wanted to be for that specific time marker? And it's very supportive in allowing students to pre-imagine and regulate time and to very carefully make choices about how they're using their time.
Wow, that's amazing. And, you know, hearing all these strategies that you're talking about today, they're so powerful because as an adult, I just see that they could be helpful for adults too. Because, like, for example, I was thinking the other day, I left my wallet at home with my health card because I was going to change my doctor. And if I only did a little dress rehearsal, you know, and thought about what should go into my wallet, that would help. So I'm sure that you really help adults too.
I absolutely. In fact, it's kind of, it's funny. I do a lot of work through Skype and through web programming. You know, that's the beauty of technology these days. But I have several executives who work in Manhattan who are some of the top brains in the world, and yet they need to be more effective in managing their time. I have individuals who work at MIT. I have individuals who are, you know, in medical school who are managing and needing some, you know, practicing for exams or needing to manage their time, et cetera. And so this is just something that all people do, and as adults, we really are required to multitask and manage so many things on our plates during the day. You know, I have lots of moms and dads who need support in managing executive function skills too. So certainly, we have a running joke in my office because I have an amazing office manager, and she will always say to me, "I want to get this right. I organize you so that you can teach organization skills." Yes, I think we all have that need to sort of have some tools in our toolbox for managing our time and materials.
What do you love most about what you do?
There are many things. I think there are probably the top two. I love presenting and lecturing to so many educators and families because it's so rewarding to feel that you've impacted the way in which people think about something. I find a lot of times people come in and they had one thought about what executive function skills were, and then you watch that they change the way that they're thinking, and suddenly they really change the way that they're teaching and working with people. And so for me, I love that. At least I hope that people have been impacted by that, so that we're really helping lots and lots of students and lots of individuals. And even more so than that, I love the families that I work with. There's nothing more joyous than having a young person who is coming in, who is working hard, and then gets these tools under their tool belt, and they have that aha moment of, wow, I can really do this. And to watch a family who has gone from experiencing stress in the household and stress at school to where suddenly things just aren't stressful and things feel happier and more balanced, that's really rewarding. I just have remarkable young people that have really touched my life.
That's amazing. Sarah, the bridge from teenage years to young adulthood, especially that time right before college, it's a confusing, daunting, it's exciting time in one's life. To any teen who's listening to you today and looking up to you, what piece of advice would you have for her?
I think the number one thing is to not see thinking about managing your time and thinking about prioritizing what you do as being a negative or as work. I think a lot of times I have students who come in and are like, I don't like schedules. I don't like calendars. I don't need to write it down. I don't like writing it down. I don't want to be restricted in my time. I have a lot of students who feel very averse and feel very kind of scheduled and almost threatened by that idea of marking something in a moment in time. And so I really encourage students to not see it through that negative light, but rather to look at it as, if you're managing your time well, then what you're gaining is time. You're actually having and finding more time and being able to free up time to do the things that you love to do without kind of this emotional weight hanging over you. So, in other words, if I come home and I go, I have homework, and I'm blowing off my homework, well, I might be doing something I, quote, like, whether it's going online, maybe playing a video game, I don't know, baking something, going outside. But there's always this little thought bubble laying over you saying, and I still have that paper to write, and I still have that exam to study for. And so you're never really thoroughly enjoying that free activity. Whereas if you just sat down and carefully managed your time and avoided all the multitasking distractions and just thoughtfully worked through a task, you've actually probably just bought yourself an hour or more of time that is unrestricted to really do and enjoy. And so it's important for people, whether you're making that transition or even when you're into adulthood, to recognize that time management is about buying time for balance. And I think that's a real shift that teens need to really learn.
Well, that's amazing. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's been really fun to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for your work helping struggling students and taking a complicated subject and really deciphering it for us. And I appreciate your time coming on and sharing that.
Thanks again. Likewise. Good luck to all those students studying for exams coming up this season.
Oh yeah, they're going to ace them. All right, well, this wraps up our show today with the executive function expert, Sarah Ward. And to learn more about the amazing work she and her team does for students struggling with brain-based learning disabilities, and hear one of Sarah's wonderful presentations, and please check out her website. It is www.cognitiveconnectionstherapy.com. Thank you for joining us on Practical College Education and Inspiration.